By the middle of the 3rd century BCE, the Platonic Academy underwent a change. It moved away from the untaught doctrines of Plato with their focus on metaphysics, and instead took a skeptical turn. This period goes under several names, including the Middle, New, or Late Academy, with some scholars identifying two separate phases to this skeptical development. However, more commonly, this phase is called academic skepticism and represents the second skeptical tradition in the Greco-Roman world after Pyrrhonism. The first head of the Platonic Academy who adopted this approach was Arcesilaus, who took over the academy sometime between 266 to 268 BCE. He re-emphasized those aspects of Socrates, the examiner, found in Plato's dialogues. The dogged pursuit of truth and self-doubt crystallized in this quote, "I am wise only because I know that I know nothing," which was attributed to Socrates. However, Arcesilaus took this one step further, and is quoted as saying, "We know nothing, not even our own ignorance." In this, it appears that the skeptical teachings of the Pyrrhonists had some influence on the late academy. Arcesilaus revelled in the dialectical method and used it to consistently attack those schools who proposed universalizing truths about reality, namely the ascendant Epicureans and Stoic schools. For Arcesilaus, the Stoic and Epicurean conceptions of truth and knowledge were far too optimistic. The claims that, although difficult, the attainment of comprehension of universal truths was within human grasp. To understand the academic skeptic's criticism of truth, we need to understand the key components of truth that existed in the two main rival traditions. For the Epicureans, truth was derived from criterions, namely the evidentiary contents of sense perception, which we then use to test against the claims of non-evidence theories. For instance, the Epicureans advanced the theories of atoms and void, and they advanced this not on the basis of direct sensation, as atoms were too small to be perceived, rather they argued from what we saw in day-to-day life, that they were objects, and that these objects were in motion. And then they used this to counter the counterintuitive theories of the Parmenideans and other Eleatic schools who suggested that there was no motion, as this violated the rules of that school's monistic metaphysics. The Stoics argued from beyond this point towards a rigorous empirical truth, which came from so-called cognitive impressions. These were sensory impressions which fulfilled three distinctive criteria. 1. That they arose from what exists, as in they arose from tangible objects and not from something that was hallucinated or imagined. 2. That they came from an impression which was in exactly accordance with the object from which it was impressed, as in the exact qualities of the object and not something which had been misperceived, and 3, of a kind as could not arise from what is not. And this third criteria is in direct competition with skeptical claims about the inability to tell the difference between different identical objects. Both the Epicurean and Stoic conceptions of truth rely on a different class of true sense perception for use as a measure for attaining truth compared to false sense perceptions. However, Arcesilaus attacked these theories by calling into question if there was any real difference between true and false sense impressions. An example used in this argument was taken from his successor, Carneades, which gave the argument that it would be impossible to tell the difference from one particular egg and any other particular egg, as both of them gave essentially identical sensory impressions at the phenomenological level. Like the earlier Pyrrhonists, Arcesilaus stated that absent a measure by which to confirm or deny truth, we should simply withhold judgment. This naturally leads to the Epicurean lazy argument, criticism, that such a skeptic life would be simply unlivable. Arcesilaus' response to this appears to be that the skeptic can live a life by acting without assenting to belief. Simply by following rational impulses and the sense data which are available to us, a skeptic could exist and exit from a room, for instance, using the door rather than running straight into the wall. However, by not assenting to the belief that there is actually a door, they guard against falsehood, namely belief. So when the door is actually a very realistic painting or a delusion, they have not assented incorrectly. The most important successor of Arcesilaus, called Carneades, took over the academy around 155 BCE. Some scholars have argued that Carneades instituted a second phase to academic skepticism, sometimes arguing that there is a middle and late phase of the academy here, with the middle phase being associated with Arcesilaus and the late phase being associated with Carneades. However, it was very difficult to determine what exactly he argued for, as there is considerable divergence between the different sources. However, it is clear that he continued down the skeptical path, and in particular battled against the Stoics. He argued against true cognitive impressions, which the Stoics use as the basis of their true knowledge. Firstly, he argues that people who are mad act just as easily and naturally on their impressions as people of sound mind, undermining the Stoic idea that cognitive impressions were superior by the fact they cause behaviour in individuals. Carneades, generalizing Arcesilaus' arguments against the Stoic cognitive impressions using further examples. The Stoics, relying on the ability to discern between objects to achieve true comprehension, was something that he really focused on, using several different arguments against it. One of which, the egg argument, I've already presented, but another one is, for instance, grains of sand. At the phenomenological level, there is no real difference between each individual grain of sand, which we can use to differentiate between them, because they produce identical sensory impressions upon us. And as such, how can any real discernment be made? Carneades also moved beyond Arcesilaus by extending his framework for a livable version of skepticism. He did this by basing action around persuasiveness, both causal, in that persuasive arguments were more likely to result in action, and rational, in that the persuasive is convincing or even plausible. Carneades developed a three-stage criterion with regards to the persuasiveness of a particular argument. 1. In matters of importance, skeptics adhere to what is persuasive. 2. In matters of greater importance, they adhere to the persuasive and undiverted. A persuasive impression is undiverted if there is no tension between it and its surrounding impressions, so something that doesn't seem very out of place with regards to the circumstances which is found. And 3, in matters that contribute to happiness, skeptics adhere to the persuasive, undiverted, and thoroughly explored impressions. A persuasive impression is undiverted and thoroughly explored when it and the surrounding impressions are closely examined without its persuasiveness being diminished. An example of this is when a skeptic looks in a dark room for a rope. Before they pick up what appears to be a rope, they look closely and poke it with a stick. Coiled objects can be ropes, but they can also be snakes. The persuasive impression that this is a rope must be examined before the skeptic adheres to it. Carneades coined a new term for the adherence to persuasive impressions, which did not infer complete assent to their truthfulness: approval. Here he is comparing how assent was used by the Stoics, in that a belief which the holder seems as wholly true. Here, approval is put forward, but apparently with the explicit statement by the holder that it is only a belief, and therefore fallible. Carneades spent some of his life lecturing and publicly debating in Rome, foreshadowing the future shift of political and intellectual gravity to Rome and away from Athens. Following his death, the last of the undisputed heads of the Platonic Academy, called Philo of Larissa, attempted to unify Stoic thought and the skeptical teachings of the new academy. This foreshadowed the development of a Middle Platonism, which fused peripatetic, Stoic, and Platonic thought. During the Mithridatic War of 88 BCE, both the Academy of the Platonists and the Lyceum of the Peripatetic school were destroyed as part of the siege of Athens. This is said to have ended the Platonic Academy. However, Platonic thought and philosophy more broadly continue to have a large impact on the intellectual landscape of the ascendant Roman regime.